Welcome back to the Lydia McGrew channel. Before I get to today's content, a brief housekeeping note. My podcast, which is the audio content of these videos, is ported over every week. And there are now 2 Lydia McGrew podcasts, one of them for content prior to a certain date in November, and the other from that time in November going forward. I'll try to remember to include both those podcast links in the show notes here. You can always go to lydiamcgrew.com and you will find both of those podcast links on that homepage at lydiamcgrew.com. This was caused by a technological glitch, just a little glitch. And so we had to start the next one. So if you find 2 podcasts that both look the same, but one has the content up to a certain date and the other has content after that date, it's not a problem. You're not doing anything wrong. That's just how it is. So I wanted to get that out of the way, make sure that's known to everybody. Please like and subscribe on my YouTube channel. And if there is a way to subscribe to the podcast, I don't even know. Someone else ports the content for me. Do that over there too, to the new one. All right, today is my Christmas video for Christmas 2024. And I want to introduce it by talking about something that was a flap some weeks back. I think it was a couple of months ago. In the social media world, things move so quickly that something like this is already yesterday's news. But I think it provides a good lead-in to the content today. And this concerns a philosopher named Philip Goff, who stated that he was converting to Christianity. And he was even on a Christian apologetics show where they said he's going to announce his conversion to Christianity on our show. And he came on the show and he said that he didn't believe in the virgin birth, and that he doesn't believe that Jesus was resurrected in a body that you could actually touch. He said he was maybe turned into some kind of energy, okay, but not a robust, tangible, visible, physical body. And a few other things. He was a panentheist and so forth. And there was quite a stir about this because, quite rightly, various people, I among them, said, well, that's not Christianity. Why are we making a big thing about that we're announcing his conversion to Christianity? It's quote unquote Christianity very much. And so that's in my mind, in the backdrop here, because I'm going to talk about a connection epistemologically between the virgin birth and the resurrection that I think is useful here. Then more recently, I've done a dialogue with a mathematics teacher from the United Kingdom named Dr. David Kemmelcook. And in the course of my dialogue with him, he said something that I thought was interesting, and I actually am inclined to agree with his use of terminology here. He said that he was not challenging a vision theory of Jesus' resurrection and of his resurrection appearances, even an objective vision, like they might have had real visions of Jesus in some sense. He said, but what I'm challenging is the miracle, which is the bodily resurrection. I thought that was very interesting, and I'm actually inclined to agree with him that for purposes of discussing the resurrection, the miracle is the bodily resurrection, because that's where the intersection with the physical plane takes place, where Jesus is there in an actual physical body. Now, people can have real visions. I think Paul had a real vision on the road to Damascus. Now, supposedly there were other things like a light that other people could see, and even a sound that other people could hear. So I'm not going to insist that we would never call a vision a miracle under any circumstances. But for purposes of the resurrection, I think it's getting at something that's important, which is that the miracle in the case of the resurrection is supposed to be, and it's always been held to be by Christians, the bodily resurrection of Jesus. That Jesus actually had a real body, and God, the Father, actually, produced a real body. So how does this fit with Christmas? Well, what I'm going to be talking about here is a very important epistemological connection between the virgin birth and the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Both of them are empirically verifiable and were empirically verifiable. There was, I would concede, a smaller immediate audience for the virgin birth than for the resurrection. That is to say, there would have been a smaller group of those, the Virgin Mary herself and those intimately acquainted with her, who would have had the opportunity to verify that she had not had opportunity to have sexual intercourse with any man. These would be people who would know her in a day-to-day fashion, so they could directly know that, and she herself could directly know that. But aside from the smaller audience issue, both of these are empirically verifiable, almost in a almost crude sense, that she's not pregnant, she's not having sex with anybody. If you could watch her from day to day, you'd see she's not having sex with anybody, and then she is pregnant, which is verifiable. And in the case of the resurrection, Jesus is dead. He's actually dead in public, crucified in public, killed by the Romans, and then his body is buried, and later his body's not there anymore, and he physically appears to people. He invites them to touch him. He gives them the opportunity to watch him eat. He has long conversations with them and so forth. This is a really important connection. The incarnation, arguably, is a theological and a metaphysical mystery in some sense. It's hard to understand. I acknowledge that. How could God be man? How could the creator of all things be himself a baby in a created body? What is that like? What was it like to be Jesus? What was it like to be inside his head? All kinds of questions to which we don't have answers. But we must sharply distinguish that from any kind of epistemological mysteriousness, like, well, we just don't know how we can know this. Now, I actually have a series, I think it's probably my most watched series, on the virgin birth that I made before. That's another thing I'll try to remember to include in the show notes. And the beginning video of that is called Mary, Did You Lie? And I argue that Mary and Joseph would not have had a good motive to lie, that she had conceived Jesus as a virgin. But yes, it's hard to understand how it happened or why it happened. And yet, there's the physical aspect of it that wouldn't have made it hard to know for those in the know that it had happened. There's no baby inside her at first. She's a virgin. Then there is a baby inside her. She's pregnant. Then the baby is born, and the baby comes forth with a real body, a real baby from her body. Similarly, Jesus is dead. His real body is really dead, and it's put in the tomb, and then he comes forth in a real body, and there's no body in the tomb anymore. We got to sometimes keep these things simple in our minds in order to understand them. What I want to emphasize here is there is no virtue in conflating the metaphysical mystery here with some kind of incorrect, empirical, epistemological mystery. Don't conflate those two. I've heard sermons, maybe you have too, where the person gets up and says something like, well, we don't really know. You know, did God create a sperm in Mary's body, or did he create and then have it united to her egg? Did God create the egg? Did he, what happened? And we don't understand how God could be made man, and we just have to accept it on faith. You see what happened right there? We went from we don't know all of the mechanics, and we don't understand the metaphysical mystery, to we don't have to seek good evidence, right? We went from metaphysical mystery to evidential looseness and slappiness. And I've heard this with the resurrection as well. It's a miracle. You can't understand it. So if something is a miracle, why would you expect to understand it? You just have to take it on faith. Boom. There's that conflation. There's that jump right there. We move from some kind of theological mysteriousness and awe and so forth to empirical looseness, evidential looseness. Just have to accept it on faith. And those are completely different things. They should not be conflated. And that's not God's purpose. In fact, to conflate those is to do something that's contrary to God's purpose. What is God's purpose in sending Jesus? Well, yes, to reconcile mankind to himself, but also to let man know that he exists, that he has certain expectations of them, that man can be reconciled to him, okay? How man can have a relationship with him. And God gives signs to tell man things. First, God does create a natural order as a backdrop. You have to have sort of a backdrop so that the miracles pop out against that backdrop and are clear. And it's like, oh, wow, that's a miracle. It's a sign. You can tell that because it's against a non-miraculous backdrop. But there's a big difference between God's creating everything at the beginning and creating the natural order, and God's doing a miracle against the backdrop of that natural order. In fact, I would call a miracle done as a sign an intervention. Some people don't like that word intervention. I love that word intervention. God intervenes in history. He reaches in there. He's not ashamed to move atoms around and to make things happen, and then to make it obvious that he's done that. His purpose in both the virgin birth and Jesus' resurrection, and indeed in Jesus' ministry, his healings and so forth, Jesus' whole life, is to show that he is active, to show himself active in the material world. So my moral here, both Christians and non-Christians should recognize that Christians should not try to get an epistemological get-out-of-jail-free card in response to skeptical concerns. How would you do that? By punting to believing by faith, to try to take the pressure off. Stop pressing me for evidence. This is a miracle. You must understand. A miracle is a mystery. You can't expect to understand it. It takes faith, blah, blah, blah. That's trying to get that illicit get-out-of-jail card. Okay? We're supposed to be giving evidence for these things. We're not supposed to be punting to faith as a way to avoid giving evidence. And if you're a Christian and you're doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. And if you're a non-Christian and you see or hear someone doing it that way, he's doing it wrong. You have a right to seek for something better. And thank God he has not left himself without witness. There is something better. With that, I will wish you a very merry evidential Christmas.